President and CEO of Family Policy Alliance based in Colorado Springs. And it is just a privilege and an honor to be with you. We're bringing this to you live today, the day after the 2022 midterm elections were mostly decided. We don't have all the election results in. There's a lot of good stuff to talk about. There's some stuff where pro-family, pro-life, pro-religious liberty voters have some work to do as our rights have been returned to the states. There's a lot of work to do in the states. We're going to hear from some state leaders, and we're going to get an update from our strategy team from Family Policy Alliance. So before we bring them in, I just want to encourage you to like this, share it, comment on it. Look, there's a lot of folks out there trying to sort through this information right now. We're trying to be a resource to you. We've got really one of the most informed and engaged audiences in America, and God is using us to do some very powerful things all across America. And that was happening yesterday. It's going to continue to happen, and we're just getting started. So with that, I'm going to introduce our guests, Julaine Appling, the president of Wisconsin Family Action, one of these just amazing and long-serving organizations. And she's led this organization through ups and downs and just really what a battleground yesterday Wisconsin turned out to be. We also have Mr. John Stemberger, who is the president and general counsel of the Florida Family Policy Council. Many of you probably saw an early call in Florida. There's a lot going on. We're going to have him unpack that for us. And of course, our audience knows Autumn Leva. She's no stranger to you all. She's our senior vice president of strategy. She deploys our assets. She mobilizes our teams, and she supports the 40 state organizations that we have, these wonderful organizations that work with over 40,000 churches and millions of advocates just like you every day, every week, to advance, honor God, advance religious liberty, and protect life in America. So with that, I'll introduce our guests in, and we'll start the conversation.
Well, hello, Craig. Hello, everyone. So good to be with you. I want to echo what you said, Craig. I think everybody should like and share this. We want to hear what you're thinking after the election results last night. I know lots of disappointments, but there's some good news too, and we want to talk about that. So please comment on there. We want to hear what you are thinking about the elections, and bring that into the video for others to enjoy as well. So I just want to start by sharing, looks like, as Craig said, we don't have the results yet for sure, but it does look like Republicans will take back over control of the House of Representatives. Now, what that means for us as pro-family voters, people who care about family values in this country, is that means that we do have a backstop finally at the congressional level, as Nancy Pelosi's House has been trying to out-radicalize themselves for quite some now. Now this truly is the people's house, and they have the opportunity to stand up for parents instead of punishing them, to speak for the lives of the unborn instead of wasting resources and time on taking the lives of the youngest Americans. So we do have a lot of good opportunity there, but as Craig said, we've got a lot of work to do ahead of the 2024 election too. We saw that in states where life was on the ballot in the 2022 election, that did not go very well. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it does mean that we have a lot of work to do. We also know that many states, before voting even started in this election, had already determined for themselves that they were going to be strongly pro-life or strongly pro-abortion. And we saw that play out last night as well. A lot of good candidates come forward, especially at the state level. And of course, the big one that everyone was talking about, you saw it on the news because it happened before the very early hours of the morning when we were still up, but hopefully most of you were able to go to bed. The big decisive win in Florida with Governor Ron DeSantis carrying the day strongly there, running on a largely pro-family platform. And that's why we've in part brought on John Stemberger, heading up the Florida Family Policy Council there, was very involved in that election, standing up for families in the Sunshine State. And so I'm excited to hear, especially from him today. And then Julaine, as Craig mentioned, in Wisconsin, heading up Wisconsin Family Action. A loss there with the governor's race, but also looking like Republicans will carry the Senate race there with Senator Ron returning to the U.S. Senate. And we want to hear what's going on there since that race hasn't been officially called. So, Craig, I'll kick it back to you to start hearing from these leaders in the states and what this means across the country.
Absolutely. And I want to thank our audience who's joining us. We see people coming in from Washington, D.C. to Washington State to our friends in Oklahoma. It's good to see you on the call. Thank you for being with us. We are going to invite our guests in right now. And while we're doing that, I'm going to share, our audience knows I'm in recovery for addiction. Sometimes I share what I call drunk wisdom, Autumn, from the recovery rooms. And one of our sayings, things like it's one day at a time, it is what it is what we say is expectations are resentment production facilities. So we're going to have that unpacked as we welcome in. Now, if we could bring in John Stemberger and Julaine Appling. John, you are in Florida. I'm going to start with you because on every national broadcast, I don't know what it looked like in the Florida broadcast, but Florida was really the first up and kind of remains the success story for families the next day. Tell us not only about what happened in Florida, but what you think the general mood is nationally.
Well, I think that, first of all, every state is very different, right? And Florida is unique because it's very diverse, but it's gone from being a blue state to a red state. But I think the two big lessons that we can learn in every state is, number one, leadership matters. People follow strong leadership. And that's true regardless of ideology. So where you have weak, uncompromising leadership, people don't follow, right? But where you have strong leadership that's reasonable, that taps into core values, you see people following. And I think that's one big lesson. The second thing is we have to maintain this common sense posture when it comes to public policy. The left is so far gone off the deep end with transgender ideology, with racism and critical race theory and all these nonsensical views. It's just the pendulum swinging too far to the left. And now it's swinging back because the people are just saying, this is ridiculous. I mean, we can't even tell what a boy and a girl is. So I think those two things, uncompromising stands on core values, right, that have served the collective wisdom of human history since the beginning of time, and strong leadership. That's the model. I think regardless of what state you're in, you can make significant progress. Irrespective of the fact that we have states that are very diverse, and that's a beautiful thing, but it's also a challenging thing to those states that are more blue.
Well, absolutely. And now, Julaine, Wisconsin was a big fight, and it's been a big fight for, since I've been alive, and certainly since I've been involved in politics. And you guys continue to defy the pundit class in Washington, D.C., and the smart people that say that you're an irredeemable blue state. I think you have your challenges, but tell us what happened in your state overnight and what you're looking at.
Well, thanks, Craig. Thanks for this opportunity to talk about these important issues. You know, Wisconsin is an example, I think, a great example of a truly purple state. In any given election, we can go red or we can go blue. And we have proven that time and time again in these statewide races. What was unique last night, at least from my perspective, is that the top of the ticket, which is where Ron Johnson is as the incumbent U.S. Senator, right now he's holding on to a very slim lead. He did come out this morning and declare a victory, which I think was very appropriate. But generally, the top of the ticket determines down ballot, right? So you get to our next level and you've got the governor, and then you've got the attorney general, and both of those are losses for Republicans. Both of those are losses for the pro-family, pro-life, pro-liberty movement. And I think to some degree what you're seeing, if you look at the Johnson race and then you look down ballot to that governor and attorney general, is to some degree the law of incumbency. It's very difficult to beat an incumbent. They have so many advantages on how they present, what they know, how they get their message out. So I think that may have played in it, because if you go even down ballot below that, actually, we picked up a Republican seat in our congressional delegation. We have 6 Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives out of 8 in Wisconsin. We are truly a mixed bag. We aren't like Florida. Florida has a lot of our people, by the way. They get a lot of our cream and help turn that state red. And then if you go down below that, our Senate and our Assembly at the state level had solid conservative majorities going into this election. The Senate actually picked up at least one seat, and they are now veto proof. But the assembly needed more votes. I think they needed 4 or 5 seats to be picked up before they become veto proof. And so as a result, they picked up, I think, 2. By the calculations that we saw early this morning, in fact, a couple of candidates that we had worked with and endorsed actually flipped seats. And as a result of that, they increased their majority, but didn't get to that veto-proof majority of 2/3 here in Wisconsin. So we are truly a mixed bag. Wisconsin is a hard state to understand, but if you look at a map, I think it's very telling. And I don't think it's just Wisconsin. I suspect if you look at John's map, you're going to see somewhat of the same thing, although, boy, you guys had a run last night, John. That was just glorious to watch. Kudos to you and your team and everybody down there. But when you look at a Wisconsin map on a statewide election, it's predominantly red. What we have trouble overcoming is our 2 major population centers in Milwaukee County and Dane County. And for instance, the governor's race, and that it was like 78, 75, 25, 78, 22 in those races. That is very hard to overcome outstate because all of our population centers in what we call the Golden Triangle here in the southeastern area of Wisconsin. So take it for what it's worth. We got some wins, we got some losses.
Well, it's extraordinary to hear that, and it's so encouraging picking up a congressional seat and having 6 out of 8. I'm surprised to hear that. I think that's a huge blessing for America. John Stemberger, I think Julaine's right to comment on Florida with your governor. I think she's right. Governors tend to win re-election. That's true of all 50 states because they do things large and small that matter to people, at their kitchen table and their family, and it makes it different. But something happened special in Florida with the leadership of Governor DeSantis. I want you to comment on that. And I also want you to comment on what Julaine started talking about, what you think is going on with Congress here and what the story is for us with the majority potentially in the House and still being tight in the Senate.
Yeah, so Governor DeSantis had a historic victory, about a 20-point lead, about 1.5 million votes over his challenger, Charlie Crist, who's a former Republican governor, then turned independent, then turned Democrat, was a city congressman, and he gave up his seat to run. But it was remarkable. We gained 3 seats in our state Senate. We gained about 9 seats in our state House. Won all cabinet seats Republican. We had 1 Democratic seat. We flipped 3 Democrat U.S. Congress seats and picked those up, flipped them. So that was remarkable. The Democrats really only won 5 counties in the entire state. So it was a remarkable victory. And I think my analysis of this whole thing, it all has to do with COVID. It's been said that people do not vote and become engaged in times of comfort and complacency. They become engaged when they're concerned. And they are concerned. And COVID did 2 big things. Number one, the government began to do a massive overreach, getting into the private lives of citizens and their medical decisions and all of that regarding mask and school lockdowns and all that, and vaccination, mandatory nature of vaccinations. Number 2, the schools, everybody became a homeschooler for a short period of time. And as a result of that, the trash and the vile ideology that was being pumped in to kids, now parents actually saw it. They don't usually see it when they're in the classroom, but they saw it on the computer screen, they saw it on their TVs. And as a result, an entire army of grizzly mamas rose up and said, enough. And so that was kind of the mushy middle who was unconcerned, and you had several movements birthed out of that. So these are all things that I think birthed a lot of the victories, at least in Florida and in other places as well. In terms of the national scene, it's going to be interesting to see if we can capture the Senate. Obviously, there's some races that are still up in the air. So I'll let somebody else who's watching the national races defer more to that. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens over the next several days in Arizona and some of these other states as well, Georgia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
I just want to say, John, I think it's so funny what you were saying about the results in Florida and everybody moving there. I'm watching the comments come in on the video, and we've got folks arguing over whether the good conservative pro-family voters in Florida and Texas should be forced to leave and go back to the other states to help turn them back more conservative. But I think the argument you're making is, no, it's the good leadership in Florida and those good wins that drove people to come there in the first place. That's exactly the point. But it's funny watching that play out in the comments. I also wanted to say, John, I think you were really insightful in the big decisive win and describing how that happened for Governor DeSantis, because it looks like, and you would know this better than we would, it looks like he took Miami-Dade County, and that was the first time a Republican governor did that in what, like 2 decades, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think politics and policy is normally impersonal. It's kind of like, oh yeah, law, public policy. But this got very personal, right? Our kids, right? Our own physical bodies being violated. So these were extremely personal things, and it engaged people like they've never been engaged before because of the nature of the very personal way we saw politics connecting to our families and our own bodies and decisions regarding they're very personal.
Hey, Autumn, can I respond to that COVID idea that John brought up? Because I think it's very insightful as well. But I think the difference is because it was a big deal here in Wisconsin, because our governor did the opposite of Ron DeSantis. He shut us all down. He shut our schools down. He, and kept us from having drive-in services on Easter weekend and in our own churches. But I think the difference is leadership. And that's what John talked about when we opened the show. Governor Evers is not a leader. He is not. And as a result of that, we didn't have that kind of projection. And what happened in our governor's race, I think, is we had such a horrible primary. The gentleman, Tim Michels, who survived the primary, came in very late with a lot of money. He was self-funding much of his campaign, but he wasn't seen as a leader. And so there was an incentive for our people to say, well, we need something different because we don't have trust in the difference. In Florida, there was no doubt that you could have trust in Ron DeSantis.
And Julaine, I want to follow up with you too, because a lot of our guests are asking, some obvious questions. Our audience, a lot of folks, myself included, if you said, what's the top issue that you want to see? We're still stunned that in America, that some human beings are treated less equal than other human beings, that we've had different names for it: slavery, suffrage, for women not being able to vote, and now abortion over the last 49 years. Emotions are raw. Abortions are sought out of fear, right? And I think a lot of voting was done out of fear. What's your take on the fact that states, when it goes to the ballot, are struggling? I mean, a lot of states move to protect babies very quickly legislatively, and in nearly half of our country. But when you put it out to the ballot, what's going on that's causing a struggle in our country right now?
Well, first, I think Wisconsin is a pretty good example of what, and we didn't have an initiative like that on our ballot. Okay. But what we did have happen is abortion became the leading issue for the Democrats, and the Republicans absolutely ran from it. Here we have this glorious pre-Roe law that bans most abortions, with one exception, life of the mother, that is enforceable right now. It hasn't been not enforced since June 24th. And the Republicans would not embrace it. They didn't want to talk about it. And so when you talk about these other states, I think my neighbor in Michigan, and I spent some growing up years in Michigan, I'm concerned about that. They have this ballot out there that allows basically abortion on demand, and it just goes tremendously far. I don't think, and I've heard other family policy council leaders talk about this, we can't win on the intellectual argument. We have to engage hearts. It can't just be about the head matter. I don't think we calculated right on the consequences of the Dobbs decision. I still think we were caught somewhat flat-footed on that. And we have to be able to talk about this in ways that make sense to women, to men, to understand the value of life, or we are not going to see different outcomes if other states put such initiatives on the balance. I think that's exactly what we faced last night. The residual effect of 50 years of being able to kill a baby, and people not understanding at the heart level, the emotional level, exactly what we're talking about. And there were so many arguments thrown out there, and people thought, well, we have to do certain things. We have to say certain things to win this. I think the fight has to be fought at a different level, way before we put it on a ballot.
Yeah, John, you were gonna jump in here too, please.
Yeah.
Please,
So I think there's two analysis: one of the amendments and one of the general candidates in the races. There were 5 amendments that were abortion, pro-life related. 3 of them were bad amendments in Vermont, and California, and Michigan, and there were 2 pro-life amendments that were good amendments in Kentucky and in Montana. All of them went the wrong way for us. In other words, the pro-abortion amendments passed and the 2 pro-life amendments did not pass. This should scream very loudly. And one of the reasons that the LGBT movement is losing right now is the pendulum was swinging so far to the left so fast. The transgender thing was just like, no way, we can't handle this. Mainstream America just said no. So we have to understand that law ultimately is going to reflect culture and public opinion. And so we have to always advocate, but we have to be very careful, especially with these amendments, because these are permanent. These are in the Constitution. And even for a pro-life amendment that doesn't get passed, you're giving cover to elected officials for decades to say, oh, the people have spoken. We don't need to do pro-life laws anymore in this state. So you better have the polling, you better have the money, and you better have the goods if you're going to put a pro-life amendment in your state and run it. I think we need to really focus on these bad amendments that we're going to see all over the country, where they're going to try to establish reproductive freedom and these kinds of rights permanently. And that's going to be very hard to change. So we have to focus on defeating the bad amendments, not necessarily passing pro-life amendments, unless you've got the goods from polling and standpoint of money, because it's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's a difficult time for our country as we go through the fits and the starts on these things. Julaine, you said something really powerfully there, that reminds me, I had the privilege of working with Chuck Colson. He hired me back in 2011. And one of the things that he really drove into me was representatives don't lead the culture. That, elected legislators, representatives of the people, they represent it as it is. And that's what John Stemberger just said. So, John, you and Chuck Colson are on the same wavelength. And you had said that, there's a bunch of work to do and going to people's hearts and things. But specifically, I just want you to unpack that. You're a state leader in Wisconsin. Your state remains obviously very closely divided. What are the things that we need to be seeing? And I'm going to be unfair and say that because for both of you here, there are 40 state organizations. We do not have 50. Please check out the links here. They want both Julaine and John, I know, desperately to have the other 10 states that have peers in those states. And if you don't believe that your state has one, you can check it out through the links. We need help in Vermont and other states like that. But Julaine, what's the work that you think you and your colleagues are going to be doing out of this at this state level?
Well, the interesting thing about the work we do, Craig, and I just did a major radio show on this and mentioned it on this, it doesn't matter who gets elected. Our work as a family policy council, as leaders on marriage and family and life and religious liberty in our states, goes on irrespective of who gets elected at any level of government. It's way too important to step away from it. It might change because of elections. And so, we have to double down. We have to make sure, number one, we're resourced. We have to make we have to make sure we're staffed with talented people who can message well for us. We need to keep working with churches. I still think churches are the key. Look, the church is the place where Bible preaching, Bible teaching churches, where truth comes out. And if we can encourage pastors to engage on these issues and to talk to their people, we can start changing hearts and minds in a more effective way. I think we must work hard to increase those relationships, grow those relationships with churches. And we need to figure out how best to message to the people that we're working with. We need to connect with the business community. We need to connect with the academic community. There are friends out there, and we need to bring all of them in. It can't just be us out here by ourselves. It needs to be as many allies as we can. And that's what we plan on doing. We plan on continuing to reach out and build those relationships so that in every sector of society, we are working with the movers and shakers who can help bring those people into a right understanding of the issues we're working on.
Amen to that. Go ahead, Autumn.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Julaine and John, both of you. I think that's exactly right. I think last night revealed just how much work we have to do to change hearts and minds and to save the lives of our youngest citizens. But, bottom line here, I think the bad news is we have a Democratic Party who is leading with abortion. It's very clear that they encouraged nearly every single campaign to lead on abortion. And so that means that we've got party leadership saying that we're going to trade lives for votes. That is a problem. It's a heart problem at its core. So Julaine and John, I think you're absolutely right. But just to add a little bit of color to the commentary, and I see lots of questions on the life ballot measures coming in on the chat. But just to add a little bit of color to that, there's a lot of confusion on the life issue, on the ballot, the ballot measures, as well as just generally in polling. We see polling on the life issue all over the place. For example, you have the majority of the United States of America disagreeing with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, which of course all of us in the pro-life community, it was something that we hoped and prayed for a long time. But yet you also have the majority of the United States of America disagreeing with abortions that happen in late terms of pregnancy, which of course Roe versus Wade allowed those. So there's a disconnect there. And part of that is in messaging, part of that is in confusion. And it was clearly a tactic of the left, of the pro-abortion side, the pro-abortion industry, to spread confusion about a lot of the ballot measures. We saw that in Kansas earlier this year, certainly again last night. And so as we are doing those things that you said, Julaine and John, and engaging hearts and minds, we have to be very clear about what this means when we protect lives, that this is a human being in the womb at the earliest stages. They should have equal rights with human beings outside the womb. And when we are clear on that, we can be clear about things like they have a heartbeat as early as 6 weeks. They have fingerprints, unique individual fingerprints by 15 weeks. We have to be very clear about what this means. And I think that was a strong lesson learned going forward, that we have to cut through the confusion and that we have to stop this practice of trading lives for votes that the Democratic Party is currently leading.
Hey, Autumn, I just want to say, I think you've been very kind to the Democrats talking about confusion. I think this is purposeful obfuscation, because if you can keep the voters confused about what a ballot measure means, what it will do, what abortion is, what it isn't, the weeks involved and all the things that happen in the development of the unborn child, you win, because confusion will cause people to vote no on things, not yes.
And we've learned that over the years in so many states, and it is deliberate. Our country's gone through some rough patches. This is a very rough patch because it's how we're treating our most vulnerable citizens. There's a lot of different iterations of that quote. You can tell a lot about the character of a country by how it treats its most vulnerable citizens, and who is more vulnerable than a child in the womb, and maybe second only to that mother who's in so much fear that she's considering taking her own child's life. And so, John, we have a lot of work to do. This conversation isn't just about that issue; it's about elections. That's where people watched yesterday, and I want to talk just a question to you about candidates, because again, the contrast of seeing such a bold leader, and Marco Rubio too, Senator Rubio, he got his chops as Speaker of the House in the state of Florida, like I got my chops there. And a lot of people thought that he would flinch. They tried to cajole him. They tried to back him into corners on issues, and he pushed back, and he stood strong with his values. I think they were both rewarded for that. What does that tell us about what we've seen a lot of Republicans do? Julaine alluded to this earlier. With Ron Johnson's one of these people that lets their values lead. They seem to be rewarded, and the people that tried to play algorithms and statistics and not really be invested in the values, they seem to get swept away effortlessly by the opposition. What's your take on that, John?
So this returns to my original point, and that is where you have leadership that is advocating winsomely on core values, and they're uncompromisingly, unapologetically pro-life, for instance. Look at Carrie Lake. I mean, her defense of the fact that all lives matter, every life has meaning and value and dignity, irrespective of where it comes from, right? It's the way she responded to the rape and incest piece. Very articulate, very winsome, and it makes sense. And so this goes to underscore the polling difference that Autumn was talking about, that people respond differently depending on how you frame it. So we have to train our candidates to be winsome and articulate, especially on these tough issues. They're not accustomed. This is our world, right? And so we live in this messaging world. They do not. And so we have to train and help help them understand how to articulate the issue. But they have to be unapologetic. If they're squishy about it, there's so many reports around the country of the Republican Party just running away and being laissez-faire about the pro-life issue. They have to show leadership. And when they do that, they're rewarded. And we saw that in Florida. We've seen that around the country. And I think hopefully we'll see it in Arizona with Governor Lake as well.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to let both of you have the last word here, but I'm going to say a couple things as we wrap up here. We like to always end our conversations with some encouragement. And I'll tell you what, I am encouraged. There were more than $8 billion, $8 billion with the B, spent to advance this radical, crazy ideology and to play in this race to prop up a failed administration that is putting families last and is targeting our children and our faith and just our very livelihoods. And it's toxic and it's horrible. But America has a lot to look forward to. We believe we're on the way to get the House. We've had some extraordinary wins. And folks, before these two wonderful state leaders give you some encouragement before we leave, I want to say, as the privilege I have to be the CEO of Family Policy Alliance, the national host for these wonderful organizations, if you wonder the difference and you're saying, but wait a second, this should have translated, if it did this here to there and it didn't, it's because of the work of these two. It's because of the work of the Wisconsin Family Action, the Florida Family Policy Council. And if you look at Iowa, where they said it was going to be difficult for Chuck Grassley, it's going to be difficult for the governor to win re-election. No, it wasn't, because there was an FPC there, where they said it in Arizona that it couldn't be done, with different things. It was Virginia, still a blue state. Guess what? They flipped another seat. I think even New York flipped a congressional seat. That does not happen by accident. It happens through the hard work. And by and large in America, where you look, there's a lot of organizations that just go on TV, and they say, we can place the best ads and see what that gets you. The organizations that actually mobilize the churches and the families at the grassroots level 52 weeks a year are the family policy councils in America. And they need your support now more than ever, because this is where the fights are. So with that, give us some encouragement. Ladies first, and John, we'll let you have the last word.
Well, thank you. And Craig, thank you for that vote of confidence in the work that we do. I often tell people, we're not the flyover organization. We're the one that stays here 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're here when the big guys are gone, after they've come in and held their rallies and their events. We're still here working on behalf of the people, holding those values in high priority, working hard with the legislature, engaging with the media, working with the churches. Look, I have great hope. People ask me all the time how I stay optimistic. Hey, I have the best job in the world. I get to wake up every morning and tell the truth to an audience of 6 million people here in Wisconsin. We have great opportunity. This is still America. We are a blessed land. Every morning that we wake up, we should say, thank you, Lord, for the opportunity of living in this country, the freest, most prosperous country in the world ever. And the window of opportunity is still open. It's a window of freedom. And as we dig in and as we work hard to change hearts and minds. And by the way, I'm not saying that's an easy lift, because every year that we graduate a class of 18-year-olds from our public government schools, they come out ready to vote, filled with that indoctrination. But it's not impossible to gain their hearts and minds. And we just need to keep working at it, rejoicing in the opportunities that we have, and taking every opportunity we have before us to engage more people and to get better every single day at what we do. I am so privileged and honored to be involved with this. And thank you to Family Policy Alliance for, as you said, Craig, hosting us and allowing us to partner with you at the national level to together work on these incredibly important issues.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
It's hard to follow those beautiful and winsome words of my good friend Julaine. But so I started out giving a devotion, which ended up into a graduation speech. And I start and end the graduation speech with this question: when the time comes, are you willing to stand alone? When the time comes, are you willing to stand alone? And I think we all have to face the fact that whether you're just a mom or a person that's, a good citizen, or whether you're a grass tops leader, we will all be given the opportunity to stand alone. Now, we shouldn't remain alone. We need people around us, right? But the hostility of the culture is so incredible. You have to have the courage to stand alone. This is why every institution of society now has just drifted off into never, never land regarding crazy matters, not because they actually believe it, but because they're being intimidated by the left, calling them names and screaming at them. So we have to have courage. We also have to remember that in God's economy, it is not victory, it is faithfulness that he is concerned with. So, and I feel bad for my brothers and sisters in very blue states that have had defeat after year. Their courage, their conviction, their resilience of facing defeat after defeat and still being faithful day after day. Not because they know they're going to win, but because they know God at someday will say, thank you, my good and faithful servant. And that's really what we want to hear, is the great commendation on that day. So I want to challenge everyone to just be faithful, irrespective of the outcome.
Amen. Well, thank you. Thank you, Julaine, Wisconsin Family Action. Thank you, John Stemberger of Florida Family Policy Council. It's been a privilege to be with you. Thank you, Leva, for leading our team with so much work and communications and strategy and coordination that we do to support the family policy councils and our other national partners that are just so important in this. Folks, the left and their partners in the news media have said that as many as 60,000 abortions have been prevented by laws in conservative states since the Dobbs decision was decided. And folks, the other way that we look at that today is that 60,000 children will be born, and the victories that we're already racking up will echo through the generations into millions and millions of more lives here in America, and bringing forward that torch, of hope from one generation to the next. Our work is just beginning. We couldn't be here without your support. Thank you so much for your tireless support of Family Policy Alliance, as well as our family policy councils, folks. We are not shrinking from this moment. We're ready to stand in the gap. We're ready to step up. We know that this is an important time for the infrastructure and the teams that you have helped us build. And we're ready to just build on the success from last night and keep going from here. Thank you, and God bless you. We ask you to share this. If you don't mind, comment on it. And please, please, please stay involved. These are important days and weeks ahead, even before the new year. Thank you, and God bless you.